All right, friends, welcome to another episode of Justice Matters One-on-One. As part of my introduction of today's guest, I don't often get to say something like, with me today in my studio here in Leesburg, Virginia, is an American hero. But I get to say that today because I have MPD Officer Daniel Hodges with us today. And I probably don't need to tell you that Daniel Hodges is one of the many police officers who defended the Capitol on January 6th, 2021, against Donald Trump's angry mob, the mob he sent there to fight like hell, having convinced them that if they don't, they won't have a country anymore. He sent them to the U.S. Capitol to stop the steal. Translation: stop the certification of Joe Biden's election win. He sent them there to nullify our vote, the vote of we the people. Thank goodness there were law enforcement officers and agents there, primarily from the United States Capitol Police, the Metropolitan Police Department. As you may know, those are the local police officers in Washington, D.C., the city police force, and they were able to stop the deadly, destructive, violent advance of Donald Trump's angry mob. And one of the people who stood up to the mob that day and protected not only the people in the U.S. Capitol, but in a very real sense, this is not hyperbole, protected American democracy. And so I am thrilled to have with me today someone who has become a friend over the years, MPD Officer Daniel Hodges. Daniel, great to be with you here, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
You have become one of the faces of the law enforcement efforts on January 6th, protecting everybody in the Capitol, protecting American democracy. But there are three other officers who, we are now pretty used to seeing as the four faces of law enforcement on January 6th. You, Harry Dunn, Aquilino Gonell, and Mike Fanone. You're kind of the opposite of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. You're kind of the four horsemen of democracy, or at least the face of law enforcement efforts at the Capitol. Let's start with a little bit of background. Are you a DC guy originally, or where did you grow up?
First, I got to give my boilerplate disclaimer. I am here in my personal capacity and not speaking on behalf of the department or the city. But as to your question, I was born and raised in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
And when did you come to the DC, Virginia, Maryland area?
Moved up to the DMV when I was 16 with my folks.
Okay. And before you joined MPD, you were actually a National Guardsman, right?
Correct. I joined the Guard in 2012. My original plan was to do the Green to Gold program, which lets you enlist as enlisted, obviously, and then use that to fill in the first 2 years of ROTC, and then finish 2 years of college, the last 2 years of college, and commission. But I decided I didn't want to make that a career, so I just finished out my enlisted contract.
You've been with the DC Metropolitan Police Department for how long now?
Over 10 years.
And what do you do with MPD?
I'm a patrol officer.
Just give the viewers some idea of when you come on for your shift, what is it you're doing when you're patrolling the streets of DC? Are you regularly making arrests? Just kind of take us through one duty day.
Sure. So we have a roll call time where everybody gets together in the same room. Our official, usually a sergeant, will give everyone their assignments, give everyone their cars, tell everyone what equipment to bring out, whether it's a defibrillator or a breach kit, something like that, and then send us on our way. We get out there, we get in our cars, we hit the streets, and we are, by and large, answering 911 calls. There's no shortage of 911 calls in the District of Columbia, especially these days because we're down so many officers from where we need to be. No two calls are the same, even if they might seem like they are. You got to treat each one as important as and life-changing as it could be. So, we get everything from family disturbances where husband and wife are having an argument to, active shootouts or carjackings and all the like. So it's all over the place.
Well, let me say thank you for the work that you do to keep the people of DC safe. I worked directly with the Metropolitan Police Department for nearly a quarter of a century because I was one of the prosecutors at the DC U.S. Attorney's Office. And people may not know that we're not really the traditional federal prosecutors. We do all of the federal prosecutions in DC, but we also do the local prosecutions. So I always felt like I was a district attorney for the District of Columbia, and you all at MPD were my local partners in crime fighting. So I worked day in and day out for decades with MPD, and I have always said it is a remarkable police force. I mean, accomplished, caring. These are protect and serve kind of people. And police often get a bad rap these days because if there is some outrage captured on cell phone video, that gets blasted out. That almost becomes people's reality or perception of the reality of what police are all about. And that is not the case. 95% of the officers are out there protecting and serving, putting their lives on the line to protect the community. So I appreciate the more than a decade that you've been doing and that you continue to do even after what you experienced on January 6th. And let me just front this. I'm not going to ask you to take our viewers chapter and verse through what you experienced at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. I know you've told that story before, including in some documentaries. I know you've testified about it in court multiple times in both criminal and civilian cases. But let me just ask you a little bit about that. People may remember what is a horrific but iconic photo, which we'll put up on the screen, of some of what was done to you on January 6th, most notably that picture where you look like you have your head being crushed in a doorway as you were trying to repel Trump's angry mob as they tried to push in to the Capitol and get after lawmakers and stop the certification. Let me ask you, what is it that brought you to the Capitol on January 6th?
So on January 6, 2021, obviously we knew that Trump was having his rally on the Ellipse, and there was going to be a large crowd there. And there was obviously chatter of, violent intent on the internet and wherever else our intel guys found it. I don't have any details. I didn't get any details really before that. We just knew, we knew what was going on that day. We knew about the certification. We knew that Trump was having his gathering, and we knew that people were angry. So we were activated in a CDU capacity, a civil disturbance unit. So while I'm normally in patrol, the civil disturbance unit is when police get together and essentially police the First Amendment assembly to make sure that it is both protected and that it doesn't become rioters. So we were down there as a CDU unit in just staying on Constitution Avenue while everyone filed into the Ellipse and being visible. Obviously, I'm not going to go through everything that happened in between that and the Capitol, but as everyone knows, it went badly. Everyone started streaming out to the Ellipse, to the Capitol, started attacking the officers there. It got out of hand, so we were summoned as backup. We got to the Capitol, fought our way through the crowd to get to the police line on the West Terrace, held that as long as we could. Eventually, it broke. I got pushed back against the wall. Someone tried to gouge out my eye. I was beaten, knocked down, kicked, punched, but we fell back to the building itself as a choke point. And then I donned my gas mask inside, found my way in the hallway or tunnel that connects the room known as the crypt to the Upper West Terrace. And that's where that video was made, because, and we fought to hold that with everything we had because we didn't know that they were able to breach elsewhere in the building. As far as we knew, that was it. That was the last line of defense. So we fought with everything we had, and I can say that they never made it through there. They might have broken through windows elsewhere, but they never made it through us.
And all legislators were safely evacuated from the Capitol, courtesy of law enforcement efforts protecting them.
Correct. There were some very close calls. You might remember Eugene Goodman leading them away from, I believe it was Romney. And I know one of them got close enough to Chuck Schumer to recognize him and say, hey, there's the head Jew or something like that. But we delayed them long enough to where everyone was able to get away safely. And then later that night, the certification was held and, the torch was passed.
So let me ask you this, Daniel. Of the four guys, Harry, Mike, Aquilino, and yourself, you're the only one who remains an active police officer. Is that right?
That's correct.
Was it a difficult decision for you to remain a police officer with the Metropolitan Police Department after you went through what you just kind of described in summary you experienced on January 6th? Or is that not something that you struggled with?
Well, it might sound weird to say this, but in a lot of ways, I was very lucky. While I did sustain a variety of injuries, I was beaten up. I took blows to the head, had a huge contusion underneath my hair that I didn't know about till the next day, and a doctor found it. I had a headache for a couple of weeks, so it was likely a concussion. But all my pieces, parts still work. I was able to go back to work in a couple of weeks, and no, I didn't really want to quit. I don't know what else I would do, except besides being a police officer. And I invested time and energy there, and I didn't want to give the insurrectionists that victory over me. And I was optimistic. I felt like we won, and there's no way that the American people could see what happened and then put someone like Donald Trump back in a position of power again. But obviously, I was mistaken about that.
But here we are.
Yeah.
So there's some good news, because in 2022, Congress passed a law requiring that a memorial to the police officers who saved the butts of the legislators that day, and in a very real sense saved democracy, a memorial to those officers be created and be installed at the U.S. Capitol. And then it turns out that didn't happen. And as a result, recently, you, joined by Harry Dunn, actually sued Congress. Not Congress precisely. Technically, you sued Thomas Austin in his official capacity as architect of the Capitol. What was it that prompted you to decide to bring this suit against, in substance, Congress for violating its own law that it had passed to create and install this memorial to you and the other officers?
Right. So by law, this plaque was supposed to be put up years ago, but they just haven't done it. It was truly remarkable how Congress came together after the 6th. Things were really looking up, right? That everyone was on the same page. This was horrible. Everyone knew who was responsible. But then, what's his name? Kevin McCarthy went down to Florida, got his marching orders from Trump, and everybody just fell in line after that, unfortunately. But for a brief, beautiful moment, Congress was unified in its horror of what had transpired, and they passed this law honoring my colleagues for what the sacrifices that they made. Of course, now that the revisionist history and efforts have taken over, they don't want to, whoever is in charge doesn't want to put it up. It's supposed to be the architect of the Capitol, so that's who we are suing, to try and see what's going on. Why haven't you put it up yet by law? I'm interested to see what comes out in discovery. Hopefully we get that far at least, because I don't understand why isn't it up? I don't get it. You asked me about my motivations. It's this attempt to whitewash the events of January 6th are very disturbing to me. And it's not just disturbing because I was there and because I was a victim, but because it offends me as an American. It's just disguising history is not what we should be doing. It's certainly not the ugly parts of our own history. And it's a disservice to future generations that they deserve to know the truth about what happened and be warned about what can happen again.
So let me do this. I have the complaint here that you and Harry Dunn filed, and I'm just going to read the first 3 short paragraphs to give the viewers some flavor of what this complaint is all about. It reads, on January 6, 2021, rioters attacked the United States Capitol in an attempt to stop the certification of the presidential election. Officers from the Metropolitan Police Department and Capitol Police, among others, fought against the mob to stop its advance. They were successful in doing so, preventing most rioters from entering the building and stopping those who did from capturing or killing the elected officials, staff, and the journalists inside. They did so at terrible personal cost, however, with this quote from Sergeant Aquilino Gonell: "I thought I was going to lose my life." Sergeant Gonell was at the Capitol that day, and hundreds of police officers were assaulted and 5 eventually died. To honor the officers who defended them, in 2022, Congress passed a law directing the architect of the Capitol to install a memorial listing the names of the officers who defended the building and those inside. Yet, after the law was passed, the politics around January 6, 2021 changed, and many politicians who once spoke plainly about the dangers of that day began to rewrite history and minimize the terror of the attack. 4 years since Congress passed the law and 3 years since the deadline for its installation has lapsed, the memorial has not been put up. Plaintiff Harry Dunn is a former officer of the United States Capitol Police. Plaintiff Daniel Hodges is a current officer of the Metropolitan Police Department. Both men defended the Capitol on January 6, 2021, and risked their lives to do so. They bring this suit to compel Congress to follow its own law and install the mandated memorial to honor the women and men who saved the lives of those inside the building, and to ensure that the history of this attack on the Capitol and on democracy is not forgotten. So, Daniel, let me ask you, as an active member of the Metropolitan Police Department, did you hesitate or have any concerns before you decided to bring this suit against sort of in de facto Congress?
No, not at all. I know that this is a very vindictive administration, and I know that working in government, I run the risk of being a target of that vindictiveness, no matter how effective or ineffective it might be. But if I were so afraid of losing my job that I didn't do everything I could to fight fascism, then I would be a Republican member of Congress.
Well said. Okay, let me shift topics just a little bit. I don't want to spend much time on this, but as we sit here, the news has recently broke that Ashley Babbitt will be given full military honors by the Air Force. She's an Air Force veteran, and our viewers probably know Ashley Babbitt was one of the only people who was killed on January 6th as she tried to climb through the broken window of a barricaded door to get into, I think it was the Speaker's lobby, and law enforcement exercising not only restraint but appropriate force in the face of a mob of thousands trying to get at the legislators, discharged his weapon and killed Ashley Babbitt. Of course, the Biden administration had properly declined to authorize military honors for an insurrectionist, a rioter who was trying to get at, U.S. legislators and stop the certification of Joe Biden's election win. What are your thoughts about this new development that now she will be given full military honors?
Yeah, I mean, it's very clearly a political thing. I believe that the former administration was correct in not giving Ashley Babbitt military honors because what she did was not honorable. She was an armed insurrectionist. A lot of people like to push this idea that she was unarmed. She had a knife in her pocket. And if you point that out to someone, they're going to say, well, it's not a gun. Well, are you telling me that someone trained by the military is unable to pose any kind of threat with a blade to our geriatric members of Congress? I'm pretty confident she could have caused a lot of damage if our law enforcement hadn't acted the way they did. So I don't know why. No, that's not true. I do know why they want to give her military honors, because they're trying to change the history. That's all it's about, is trying to make it look like they were the good guys when they weren't.
So let's kind of finish up with this, something that may be directly impacting your day-to-day work as a police officer in D.C. We used to call it the DMV, right? The District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia area. And now I started calling it the MDC, the Militarized District of Columbia, because we have National Guardsmen and women, not only from D.C., but apparently pouring in from red states. Are the National Guard members who are deployed to D.C. as we speak, Is that impacting your work at all as an MPD officer? What's your take on what's going on now?
Well, me personally, it hasn't changed anything for me because of where and when I work in the city. I don't run into them. However, I'm aware of what they are doing, or rather what they are not doing. Then the thing you have to understand about, the military is that they're not trained for law enforcement purposes. They're trained to close with and destroy the enemy. They're not trained for, traffic stops. They're not trained to mediate family disputes. They're not trained in DC code. So there's very little that they can really do in the city that would be helpful for us, which is why you just see them standing around on the mall, standing around in Georgetown, people filming them and asking them what your mission is, and they don't have an answer because they don't know. And it's not surprising because there's nothing they can really do that would be very helpful. So they haven't impacted me personally, but I know that they're just being used as a political prop, as an intimidation tactic, and that's really sad. It makes me sad for them. As someone who served in the Guard and knows the noble reasons you join, that's not what you should be about.
And there are multiple news reports that some of these members of the National Guard who have been deployed to D.C. under the pretext of, there's this enormous crime emergency, everything's out of control. And yet what they're doing presently, according to multiple news accounts, they're doing things like landscaping, they're mulching, they're armed with weed whackers, which sort of runs contrary to Donald Trump's claim that this is all about a crime emergency in Washington, D.C.
Right. Yeah. There. Some of them are armed with actual weapons now, which is surprising since, as I mentioned, they can't really do anything law enforcement related. I don't know why they're carrying actual weapons, but yeah, since they can't do anything else, I guess he figured they might as well plant grass and do mulching. The National Park Service used to have tons of people who did that, but they all got fired by the Trump administration. So now the National Guard is costing the taxpayers $1 million a day to stand around on street corners and plant grass.
All right, let's finish with this, because I heard you say this recently and it kind of stuck right here. It resonated with me. We see some of the abuses going on around the country with respect to how law enforcement, ICE in particular, is dealing with undocumented immigrants. I mean, the Fourth Amendment protects all of us against an unreasonable search and seizure. Seizure is a term of art, and when an ICE agent grabs hold of somebody, that's a seizure. And it has to be reasonable. It has to be supported by adequate evidence, if not a warrant. And yet we have seen the abuses, and don't take my word for it, a judge out in California ruled that ICE was engaged in abusing the Fourth Amendment and the due process rights of some of the undocumented immigrants that they were taking into custody. That was a ruling affirmed by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. I don't know if MPD is involved in enforcing immigration laws. I wouldn't think that would be part of their mandate, but you said something the other day that resonated with me about what you would do if somebody, asked you to engage in this kind of conduct. And what was that?
Right. Well, it's very simple. We filter everything we do through our value systems and our ethics primarily. We're not machines. We know our job, but we still have to agree with what were our actions, essentially. So if someone tried to get me to engage in this horrific enterprise that America is sadly doing now, which is the abduction and trafficking of brown people to extraterritorial concentration camps, I would tell them no, and I would quit, because I would much rather, I would beg on the street before I participated in that sort of thing. And then if I ever saw, you see all these reports of alleged police officers without any identifying information wearing masks, no insignia for their agency, no name tag, no nothing. If I saw a group of armed people wearing masks and no identifying information trying to push a brown person to a van, I would treat it like an armed kidnapping until they were able to prove otherwise.
And I want to quote you from a few days ago where you just said flat out, I would quit before I would kidnap a brown person. And that, in my book, makes you a hero, not only in act and deed for what you did on January 6th, but the motivation behind why you chose to serve and why you continue to serve the people of the District of Columbia. So I thank you on behalf of our viewers for what you did on January 6th, what you continue to do every day, particularly in the face of what feels like a hostile military/law enforcement takeover of D.C. being attempted by Donald Trump. As long as there is some pushback right now, and that's a good thing. They weren't able to oust the chief of police from MPD, but it feels to me like this is going to be a battle and a struggle that we are all involved in for a long time, at least while Donald Trump remains in power. So thank you for coming. Thank you for doing what you do. I'll tell our viewers that we decided to lose the jackets today because it's kind of hot out here in Northern Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. But again, Daniel, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.